Imagine standing on a world where the sky is thick, with yellow clouds of sulfuric acid, and the ground beneath your feet is so hot it could melt the tires off a car. That's Venus, a place so hellish that calling it Earth's twin feels like a cruel joke. Yet, for decades, one nation seemed obsessed with it: the Soviet Union. Now, here's the part that makes you pause. While the United States was busy planting flags on the moon and dreaming of Mars, the Soviets zeroed in on Venus. Not just once or twice, but over 30 missions, each one more daring than the last. And unlike the moon, Venus wasn't welcoming. This wasn't a place for astronauts to take selfies. It was a planet that fought back, destroying spacecraft after spacecraft as if it had a personal grudge. So the big question is, why? Why risk it all for a world that seemed to scream, "Stay away"? Was it about pride, proving they could do what no one else dared? Or was it something deeper, something they found or thought they found that couldn't be explained? And here's where things get really strange. Among the many discoveries the Soviets made on Venus, one has sparked endless debates. The possibility that they stumbled upon signs of life, or maybe just a colossal mistake. But before we dive into that rabbit hole, let's rewind and take a closer look at the planet itself. Because to understand why Venus is such a mystery, you have to understand what makes it so utterly terrifying. Let's talk about Venus. On paper, it sounds like a place we'd want to visit. It's close to Earth, almost the same size, and it even has clouds. But don't let that fool you. Venus is like Earth's evil twin. Familiar enough to intrigue us, but hostile enough to terrify anyone who dares get too close. Here's the deal. Venus is hot. And I don't mean the kind of hot where you could fry an egg on the pavement. I mean the kind of heat that melts metal. Temperatures on Venus average around 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Hotter than Mercury, even though Venus is farther from the Sun. Why? Its atmosphere is basically a giant blanket of carbon dioxide, trapping heat in a runaway greenhouse effect that makes our concerns about global warming look like child's play. But wait, there's more. The atmosphere isn't just hot, it's dense. The pressure on the surface is about 92 times greater than what we feel on Earth. Imagine the weight of being 3,000 feet underwater. Except you're not in the ocean, you're standing on land. It's the kind of pressure that crushes most spacecraft like soda cans. And even if you somehow survive the heat and pressure, the air itself is poison. The atmosphere is almost entirely carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid swirling above. Breathing there isn't just impossible, it's suicidal. And then there's the weather. Forget gentle breezes or even Earth's most violent hurricanes. Winds in Venus's upper atmosphere whip around the planet at 250 miles per hour, but down on the surface, things are eerily calm. The winds are so slow you might not even notice them, except for the fact that everything around you would be glowing red from the heat. In short, Venus is like every nightmare rolled into one. It's a furnace, a pressure cooker, and a chemical factory all at once. So here's the million-dollar question. Why on Earth, or off Earth, would anyone want to go there? The Soviets had their reasons. For one, Venus is close. It's the nearest planet to Earth, which made it a tempting target during the early days of space exploration. And then there was the allure of the unknown. Venus hides its surface beneath thick clouds, making it impossible to see what's down there without specialized instruments. What could be lurking beneath? Vast oceans, alien landscapes, something more? The Soviets wanted answers and they were willing to risk everything to get them, but Venus wasn't going to make it easy. The first missions failed spectacularly, one after the other. Probes overheated, crumbled under the pressure, or simply vanished without a trace. Venus, it seemed, wasn't just inhospitable, it was actively hostile. And yet the Soviets didn't give up. Each failure taught them something new, and with every new mission, they inched closer to unlocking Venus's secrets. What drove them to keep going? Was it curiosity? Ambition? Or was it something they weren't telling the rest of the world? Keep that question in mind because it's going to come up again. But first, let's talk about how the Soviets got their start, and how failure after failure set the stage for one of the most extraordinary space exploration sagas in history. The The Soviet Union had its eyes on Venus as early as the 1960s, but let's be honest, their first attempts were nothing short of disastrous. It all started with Venera 1, launched in 1961. This probe was supposed to fly by Venus and beam back valuable data. Instead, it lost contact with Earth just 7 days after launch, drifting silently through space. No one even knew if it made it near Venus, and that set the tone for the next several missions. Venera 2, same story. The spacecraft failed to send back any data, leaving scientists scratching their heads. Then came Venera 3, which holds the dubious honour of being the first human-made object to crash into another planet. That's right, crash. It was supposed to land on Venus and collect data, but instead it plummeted to the surface like a rock. The heat and pressure destroyed it before it could transmit anything useful. A win? Not quite. By this point, most countries would have cut their losses, but not the Soviets. For them, failure wasn't a sign to stop. It was a challenge to do better. And with every broken probe, they learned something new. They began to understand just how unforgiving Venus was. They upgraded their technology, reinforced their spacecraft, and tried again. But let's take a moment to appreciate what they were up against. Imagine trying to design a machine that could withstand conditions that don't exist anywhere on Earth. Every single component had to be rethought. Electronics had to survive temperatures that would fry the circuits in seconds. Materials had to endure pressures that would crush steel. Even basic communication with Earth was a gamble, thanks to Venus's thick atmosphere. It was like trying to build a ship that could sink to the bottom of the ocean, survive lava, and then send a text message home. The Soviets weren't just fighting against Venus, they were battling time. The United States was making headlines with the moon missions, and the Soviets needed a win. Venus became their obsession. Each failure pushed them harder. If one probe didn't make it, they'd launch another, and another. It was almost reckless, but it was also genius. They knew every failure was a step closer to success. One of the biggest turning points came with Venera 4, launched in 1967. This was their first real breakthrough. Unlike its predecessors, Venera 4 didn't try to land. Instead, it was designed to parachute into Venus's atmosphere, sending back data as it descended. And this time, it worked. The probe survived long enough to reveal just how extreme Venus's atmosphere was. It confirmed what scientists had only guessed: temperatures over 900 degrees Fahrenheit, crushing pressures, and an atmosphere made mostly of carbon dioxide. For the first time, humanity had real numbers to describe just how hellish Venus truly was. But even then, the Soviets weren't satisfied. Venera 4 was just the beginning. They wanted to go further, much further. They didn't just want to study Venus, they wanted to touch it. They wanted to land, take pictures, and bring back hard evidence of what this planet was hiding. Of course, this obsession came at a cost. Many of the missions that followed still ended in failure. Probes were crushed, melted, or lost in the void. But each one brought the Soviets closer to their goal. By the late 1960s, they weren't just launching spacecraft, they were rewriting the rules of space exploration. And Venus was slowly revealing its secrets. But then something strange happened. As the Soviets refined their technology and started succeeding, rumours began to swirl. They weren't just exploring Venus out of curiosity, some said. They were looking for something were unusual. What did they find? Or what did they think they found? That's where things start to get really interesting. By the time the Soviets launched Venera 4 in 1967, they were done playing games. They had learned from years of failure, and this mission was designed to do what none before it could: survive Venus, even if only for a short while. And for the first time, it worked. Venera 4 didn't attempt to land. Instead, it parachuted into Venus's atmosphere, collecting data as it descended. For 93 minutes, it sent back information, peeling back the layers of Venus's mysteries. What it revealed was shocking, even to the scientists who expected the worst. The atmosphere was so dense it was practically a liquid. The heat was so intense it shattered any hope of finding Earth-like conditions. Venus wasn't just inhospitable, it was apocalyptic. The success of Venera 4 was monumental. It was the first time humanity had received direct data from the atmosphere of another planet. For the Soviets, it was a validation of their persistence, and it gave them a taste of what was possible. They weren't just launching probes anymore, they were beginning to understand Venus. But they weren't satisfied with atmospheric data. They wanted to reach the surface. And in 1970, they did just that with Venera 7. This was the first spacecraft in history to successfully land on another planet. To be fair, successfully might be stretching it a bit. The probe hit the surface much harder than intended, falling over and transmitting weak signals for only 23 minutes before succumbing to Venus's brutal conditions. But it was still a victory. For the first time, humanity had touched another planet's surface and lived to tell the tale briefly. The Soviets were relentless. They kept launching, refining their designs, and pushing the limits of what their technology could handle. By the time Venera 9 and Venera 10 were launched in 1975, they were ready to do more than just land. These probes were equipped with cameras, and they succeeded in doing what no one had ever done before. They captured images of Venus's surface. Let's pause for a second to appreciate how insane that is. Venus isn't the kind of place where you can just snap a selfie. The surface is a death trap. Cameras had to be designed to survive temperatures hotter than most ovens, crushing pressures, and an atmosphere that eats through metal. And yet, against all odds, they worked. The images Venera 9 and 10 sent back were haunting. They showed a barren wasteland, covered in jagged rocks stretching into an alien horizon. There was no sign of water, no vegetation, no life. Just a desolate, lifeless expanse under a dim, orange sky. It was eerie, like looking at the ruins of a world that had once been alive but had long since been abandoned. But here's the thing. The Soviets weren't just interested in pictures. They wanted data. They wanted to know what Venus was made of, how its atmosphere worked, and whether its surface held any secrets. And as they collected more information, they started noticing things that didn't quite add up. For one, Venus's surface seemed surprisingly uniform. The probes landed in different locations, yet the terrain looked almost identical. Was this just a coincidence? Or was something strange happening beneath the planet's thick clouds? And then there were the chemical readings. Some elements appeared in unexpected quantities, hinting at processes scientists didn't fully understand. But the real bombshell came later, with Venera 13 and Venera 14. These missions didn't just land, they thrived, lasting far longer than anyone thought possible. They transmitted stunning panoramic images and detailed chemical analyses, but they also captured something unusual. In one of Venera 13's images, there was an object, a dark, irregular shape that didn't seem to belong. This was the beginning of one of the most controversial debates in the history of space exploration. Was it just a rock, a shadow, or something else entirely? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The Soviets had broken through Venus's clouds and reached a new frontier. They had seen what no one else had seen, touched what no one else had touched, and gathered data that would shape our understanding of the planet for decades to come. The images from Venus weren't just pictures. They were glimpses into a world no human had ever seen before. When Venera 9 and Venera 10 sent back the first photos in 1975, the scientific community was stunned. These weren't glossy snapshots of a distant paradise. They were gritty, monochrome, and hauntingly alien. For the first time, we could see what lay beneath the planet's thick, toxic clouds, and it was nothing like what anyone had imagined. Venus's surface was barren and unforgiving. Jagged, angular rocks stretched out toward a horizon, shrouded in a haze of sulfuric acid clouds. The ground was scorched, cracked, and lifeless, with no rivers, no oceans, and no relief from the oppressive heat. The skies glowed with an eerie, orange tint, distorted by the thick atmosphere. Everything about these images screamed desolation. Venus wasn't just uninhabitable, it was hostile on a level that seemed almost personal. But it wasn't just the visuals that fascinated scientists. The probes also transmitted data about the planet's physical and chemical conditions. Temperatures near 900 degrees Fahrenheit, atmospheric pressure 92 times that of Earth, a cocktail of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and sulfuric acid making up the air. The ground itself was mostly basalt, a volcanic rock that hinted at a fiery, turbulent past. Venus wasn't just a dead planet, it was a tortured one. Then came Venera 13 and Venera 14, launched in 1982. These probes didn't just match their predecessors, they surpassed them, surviving far longer on the surface than anyone expected. Venera 13 lasted an incredible 127 minutes, a feat of engineering given the planet's extreme conditions. And the data it sent back, unprecedented. The panoramic images from Venera 13 revealed a landscape littered with rocks of all shapes and sizes. Some were smooth and weathered, while others were sharp and jagged, as if they had just been blasted from a volcanic eruption. The colours were surreal, deep oranges and reds, distorted by the dense atmosphere. It was a world that seemed both familiar and alien, a reminder of Earth's volcanic regions but stripped of all life. Venera 13 didn't stop at images, it also captured something no one had heard before, the sound of Venus. For the first time in history, we listened to an alien world. The recordings revealed a low, rumbling noise, the sound of Venusian winds sweeping across the barren surface. It was haunting, like a distant growl, and it brought a strange kind of life to the otherwise lifeless planet. But the real intrigue came when scientists began analysing the images more closely. In one of Venera 13's photos, something seemed off. Among the jagged rocks and barren terrain, there appeared to be a dark, irregular object. It was small, about the size of a book, and it looked out of place. At first glance, it could have been just another rock, but then in subsequent photos, the object was gone. This sparked endless speculation. Was it just a trick of the light, a shadow, or was it something more? Some researchers suggested it might have been debris from the probe itself dislodged during landing. Others took a wilder leap. What if it was alive? What if Venus wasn't as lifeless as we thought? This wasn't the only anomaly. Another image captured what looked like a scorpion-shaped object near the probe. Again, it could have been nothing, a rock formation or a camera artifact. But to some, it was tantalizing evidence that Venus might hold secrets we weren't prepared to understand. The Soviet scientists were careful not to make bold claims. They knew the risks of jumping to conclusions. But the images, combined with the unusual data collected from the surface, left the door open to interpretation. Venus was proving to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. Still, the official stance was cautious. The extreme conditions of Venus made it highly unlikely that life as we know it could exist there. But what if life on Venus wasn't like life on Earth? What if it had adapted to the heat, the pressure, and the toxic atmosphere? The idea seemed far-fetched, but the anomalies in the Venera images kept the question alive. As the Soviets continued their exploration, one thing became clear: the more we learned about Venus, the less we seemed to understand it. Was the planet hiding something? Or were we just seeing patterns where none existed? Whatever the truth, the Venera missions left a legacy of both discovery and mystery. The surface of Venus had been revealed, but it was what we didn't see, or what we thought we saw, that kept scientists and dreamers coming back for more. This is where the story of Venus takes a wild turn. After decades of exploration, with countless failures and hard-won successes, the Soviets had collected some of the most detailed data ever from another planet. But within those reams of data and photos, some things didn't quite add up. Strange, unexplained anomalies that sparked a debate that continues to this day. Could the Soviets have stumbled upon evidence of life on Venus? Or were they seeing something that simply wasn't there? Let's start with the most infamous case, the mysterious black rag spotted in the images taken by Venera 13. One of the probe's panoramic photos showed an irregular dark object lying on the rocky surface near the spacecraft. At first glance, it didn't seem like much, just another odd-shaped rock, maybe a piece of debris from the probe itself. But then in the next series of images, the object was gone. No trace. It vanished, leaving only questions behind. Now here's where things get weird. Some scientists suggested that the black rag might have been alive, some kind of organism capable of surviving the planet's extreme conditions. Others dismissed it as a trick of the light, a shadow, or even a smudge on the camera lens. But what if it wasn't? What if something, or someone, was moving around on the surface of Venus, right under our noses? And that wasn't the only anomaly. In another photo, there appeared to be an object shaped vaguely like a scorpion near the probe. The resemblance was uncanny, too uncanny for some people to ignore. Once again, the object seemed to move or disappear between photos, adding fuel to the fire of speculation. Were these just rocks kicked up during the probe's landing, or were they something more? The idea of life on Venus wasn't as far-fetched as it might sound. After all, scientists have long speculated that life could exist in extreme environments, like the hydrothermal vents on Earth's ocean floor or the acidic pools of Yellowstone. Venus, with its scorching temperatures and crushing pressure, might seem like a death trap to us, but what if some form of life had evolved to thrive in those conditions? Of course, not everyone was convinced. Many scientists pointed out that Venus's surface was so hostile that it seemed impossible for life to exist there. Temperatures of 900 degrees Fahrenheit would incinerate organic molecules, and the pressure alone would crush anything resembling life as we know it. Add in the sulfuric acid clouds and the toxic atmosphere, and the idea of life on Venus seemed like a long shot at best. But that didn't stop people from wondering. In 2012, a Russian scientist named Dr. Leonid Kazan-Fomality reignited the debate. He claimed to have re-examined the Venera 13 photos and identified what he believed were multiple signs of life. According to Kazan-Fomality, the images showed objects that appeared to move, including something that resembled a disc and another that looked like a crab or scorpion. He even suggested that these creatures might have been alive during the probe's mission. Naturally, Kazan-Fomaliti's claims were met with skepticism. Critics argued that the objects were likely artifacts caused by camera angles, shadows, or even vibrations during the probe's landing. Others pointed out that the extreme conditions on Venus made it nearly impossible for any form of life to exist, let alone creatures large enough to be seen by a camera. But here's the thing. Even if Kazan-Fomality was wrong, the anomalies he highlighted raised an important question. What if we're looking for the wrong kind of life? Most of our assumptions about life are based on Earth's conditions. Water, moderate temperatures, oxygen-rich atmospheres. But what if life on Venus doesn't play by Earth's rules? What if it's made of something completely different, something that can survive in environments we can barely comprehend? It's worth noting that Venus wasn't always this hostile. Scientists believe that billions of years ago, the planet might have had oceans and a more Earth-like climate. If life ever existed on Venus during its early years, could it have adapted to the planet's changing conditions? Could it still be clinging to survival in the most unlikely of places? We may never know for sure. The Venera missions ended decades ago, and while they left us with a treasure trove of data, they also left us with just as many questions. Were the anomalies in the photos signs of life, or were they just mistakes? And if they were mistakes, what does that say about our ability to recognize life on other worlds? What's clear is this: the Soviets didn't just explore Venus, they opened a door to a mystery that is yet to be solved. And even now, as scientists plan new missions to Venus, the question lingers. Is Venus truly lifeless, or is it hiding something we're not ready to understand? As if Venus's images weren't mysterious enough, the Soviets managed to record something even more extraordinary: the sound of Venus. That's right, they captured audio from the surface of a planet over 24 million miles away. And what they heard? It wasn't just noise, it was haunting, alien, and entirely unforgettable. Let's rewind to 1982 and the Venera 13 mission. This wasn't just any spacecraft, it was a technological marvel, designed to survive the unimaginable heat and pressure of Venus's surface for as long as possible. But its mission wasn't just about taking pictures or analysing rocks. It was equipped with a microphone, making it the first human-made device to listen to another planet. The sound recordings were eerie, to say the least. They revealed a low, rumbling hum, punctuated by bursts of what can only be described as breaths of wind. Imagine standing in a vast, empty desert, with the wind sweeping across the sand. But instead of a gentle breeze, it's a dense, oppressive atmosphere, pressing down on everything. That's what Venus sounds like. Heavy, muffled, and unrelenting. Now let's put this into perspective. Venus's atmosphere is so thick that sound behaves differently there. On Earth, sound waves travel through air, bouncing off objects and creating echoes. But on Venus, the air is so dense that sound moves slower and gets distorted. Even a simple noise, like a rock shifting, would sound completely alien. The Venera 13 microphone wasn't just picking up sound, it was capturing a glimpse into a world that operates under entirely different physical laws. But here's the part that makes you stop and think, what else could those sounds mean? Were they just the wind and atmospheric pressure? Or could they hint at something more? The Soviets didn't interpret the recordings as evidence of life, but they did suggest that Venus's atmosphere might be more dynamic than anyone realized. Could there be weather systems, air currents, or even geological activity happening on the surface? One particularly haunting moment in the recordings captured what sounded like a low, steady roar, as if the planet itself were exhaling. Was it just the wind moving through the dense clouds, or was something more dramatic occurring beneath the surface? Volcanoes, perhaps? Venus is known to have been volcanically active in the past, and some scientists believe it still might be. Could the sounds of Venus hold clues to these hidden processes? For the Soviets, the recordings weren't just data, they were a connection to an alien world. Imagine hearing something that no one else on Earth has ever heard before. It's not a photograph you can analyse or a sample you can test. It's a direct sensory experience, like standing on the surface of Venus yourself. For the first time, humanity didn't just see Venus, we heard it. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some skeptics argued that the recordings didn't tell us much. They were just wind and atmospheric pressure. Interesting, sure, but hardly groundbreaking. But others saw them as a reminder of how much we still don't know. If sound can behave so strangely on Venus, what else might be happening there that we can't detect with our current technology? And then there's the more philosophical question. What would it be like to actually stand there and hear those sounds for yourself? Could you survive long enough to listen? Probably not. But the fact that we've captured these alien noises at all is a testament to human curiosity and to the ingenuity of the Venera missions. The sound of Venus is more than just a recording. It's a glimpse into the unknown, a reminder that even in the most hostile places, there's a story waiting to be told. And for the Soviets, it was one more piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that would only grow more complex as their missions continued. But for all their triumphs, the Soviets couldn't solve every mystery. The more they learned about Venus, the more they realized how much they didn't know. And as their obsession deepened, the cracks in their space program began to show. The Soviet Union's Venus missions weren't just about exploring a distant planet. They were about pushing the limits of what humanity could achieve, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And while they didn't find lush landscapes or alien civilizations, what they did discover changed our understanding of planets, atmospheres, and the very nature of life itself. First, let's talk about what Venus taught us about planetary science. Before the Venera missions, we knew shockingly little about our closest planetary neighbour. Early telescopes couldn't penetrate the thick clouds surrounding Venus, so everything we thought we knew was based on speculation. Some scientists believed Venus might have oceans, jungles, or even life forms similar to Earth's. Others suspected it was a barren wasteland. The truth, as the Venera probes revealed, was far stranger and much harsher. Venus turned out to be a planet dominated by extremes. Its thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide created a runaway greenhouse effect, trapping heat and making the surface hotter than Mercury, even though Venus is farther from the Sun. The Venera missions showed us the consequences of an atmosphere completely out of balance. This wasn't just a planetary curiosity, it was a warning. Venus became a chilling example of what could happen if greenhouse gases spiral out of control, an insight that's especially relevant as we grapple with climate change on Earth. But Venus didn't just teach us about planets, it also forced us to rethink life itself. When we imagine life on other worlds, we tend to picture Earth-like conditions: water, moderate temperatures, oxygen-rich air. Venus shattered that paradigm. If life exists or ever existed on Venus, it would have to be radically different from anything we know. Could life survive in sulfuric acid clouds? Could it thrive in crushing pressure and scorching heat? The idea seems impossible, but then again, so did life thriving in Earth's hydrothermal vents, Antarctic ice, or deep underground. Venus expanded our understanding of what might be possible. The Soviet missions also revolutionized the technology of space exploration. Think about it. They had to build spacecraft that could withstand temperatures hotter than molten lead, pressures that would crush a submarine, and corrosive clouds that would eat through most metals. The Venera probes were engineering marvels, and the lessons learned from their construction continue to influence spacecraft design today. Without the challenges of Venus, we might not have the technology to explore other hostile environments, both in space and on Earth. And then there's the cultural impact. The Venera missions weren't just scientific achievements, they were a statement. During the Cold War, the space race was as much about politics as it was about exploration. The United States had its eyes on the Moon and Mars, but the Soviets staked their claim on Venus, proving they could tackle the most difficult challenges in space exploration. It wasn't just about reaching Venus, it was about conquering it, even if only for a few fleeting moments. But perhaps the most profound lesson from Venus is one we're still grappling with today: how little we truly know. Despite all the data the Venera missions collected, Venus remains an enigma. Why is its atmosphere so dense? What caused its runaway greenhouse effect? Did it once have oceans? And if so, what happened to them? Could life, however strange, still exist in its upper atmosphere? Every answer raises new questions, and that's what makes Venus so fascinating. Even now, as scientists plan new missions to Venus, they're building on the foundation the Soviets created. NASA's upcoming Da Vinci Plus and Veritas missions aim to dive deeper into Venus's atmosphere and map its surface in greater detail. These missions wouldn't be possible without the data and experience gained from the Venera program. Venus isn't just a relic of the past, it's a frontier for the future. But for all its lessons, Venus also serves as a reminder of what could have been. The Soviets stopped their Venus exploration after the collapse of their space program in the late 1980s. What might they have discovered if they had continued? Could they have solved the mysteries of Venus, or would the planet have kept its secrets hidden? One thing is certain, Venus isn't done with us yet. It still has stories to tell, mysteries to unravel, and lessons to teach. And as we look to the stars, it's worth remembering that some of the most important answers might be waiting for us on the planet next door. The Soviet Union's exploration of Venus wasn't just groundbreaking, it was obsessive. They launched over 30 missions, surviving countless failures and achieving incredible successes along the way. Yet by the late 1980s, their Venus program came to an abrupt halt. What happened? Was it just the inevitable result of political and economic turmoil, or was there more to the story? To understand why the Soviets stopped, you have to look at the context. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was struggling. The Cold War was draining its resources, and its economy was in freefall. Space exploration, once a symbol of Soviet pride and power, was becoming harder to justify. Every Venera mission cost millions, and with the United States focusing on the Moon and Mars, Venus exploration began to seem like a lower priority. After all, it's hard to get public enthusiasm for a planet that's essentially a death trap. But there was more to it than just money. The Soviet space program was hitting a technological ceiling. They had pushed the limits of what their probes could do, but Venus's extreme conditions left little room for improvement. Even their most advanced spacecraft, like Venera 13 and Venera 14, could only survive for a couple of hours on the surface. The challenges of Venus weren't just daunting, they were almost insurmountable. To go further, they would need entirely new technologies, and that wasn't in the cards for a country on the brink of collapse. Then there's the human factor. By the late 1980s, the Soviets had achieved nearly everything they set out to do on Venus. They had landed, taken pictures, recorded sounds, and gathered data about the atmosphere and surface. The scientific community was beginning to shift its focus to other planets, like Mars, which seemed more promising for long-term exploration. Venus, with its hostile environment and slim chances of hosting life, was becoming less of a priority. But here's the part that makes you wonder. Was there something about Venus that the Soviets weren't telling us? Some conspiracy theories suggest they might have discovered something that was never fully disclosed. Strange anomalies in the photos, unexplained chemical readings, and the persistent rumours of life on Venus have fueled speculation for decades. Could it be that they stopped because they had found something too unsettling to continue? It's unlikely, but the lack of transparency surrounding the program leaves just enough room for doubt. Even without diving into conspiracy theories, there's a sense of unfinished business. The Soviets had a habit of pushing boundaries, of going further than anyone thought possible. If their space program hadn't been derailed by political and economic collapse, it's easy to imagine them sending more advanced probes, or even considering missions to Venus's upper atmosphere, the one part of the planet that might still hold potential for life. But the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought an end to those dreams. Their space program was dismantled, and Venus was left behind. The end of the Venera program wasn't just a loss for the Soviet Union, it was a loss for humanity. Venus remains one of the least explored planets in our solar system, despite being one of the most intriguing. The data collected by the Venera missions is still some of the most detailed we have, and much of it hasn't been fully analysed even today. There's a sense that we barely scratched the surface of what Venus has to offer, but maybe the story isn't over yet. In recent years, there's been renewed interest in Venus. NASA, ESA, and even private companies are planning missions to explore the planet's atmosphere, surface, and geological history. These missions will build on the foundation laid by the Soviets, using modern technology to go further than ever before. And who knows, maybe one day we'll pick up where the Soviets left off, unravelling the mysteries they only began to uncover. Maybe the unfinished mission isn't so unfinished after all. But that brings us to the big question. What's next for Venus? Is it a dead world, a stepping stone for humanity, or something more? That's where we turn to the future. Venus may have been left behind after the Soviet Union's collapse, but the mysteries it holds have refused to let go of our imagination. As we stand on the edge of new technological advancements in space exploration, the question remains, what role does Venus play in humanity's future? Is it a world we can learn from, a place we might one day colonize? Or is it simply a planetary, cautionary tale? Let's start with the most exciting possibility, life. The idea that life, however strange, might exist on Venus has lingered since the early days of exploration. And while the surface is almost certainly too hostile for life as we know it, the upper atmosphere tells a different story. At an altitude of around 30 miles, the temperature and pressure are surprisingly Earth-like. In 2020, scientists made headlines by detecting traces of phosphine in Venus's atmosphere, a chemical that on Earth is often produced by biological processes. Could this be evidence of microbial life floating in Venus's acidic clouds? Or is there another non-biological explanation? The discovery sparked a flurry of interest in Venus, but it also highlighted how much we still don't know. If there is life on Venus, it's likely to be microscopic and radically different from anything we've seen before. It would have to survive in clouds of sulfuric acid, using chemical processes that we can barely begin to imagine. But if life does exist there, even in the tiniest, most alien form, it would revolutionize our understanding of biology and the possibilities for life in the universe. Beyond the search for life, there's the question of colonization. At first glance, Venus seems like the worst candidate for a second home. Its surface is a fiery hellscape, and its atmosphere is a deadly mix of carbon dioxide and acid. But here's the twist. Above the clouds, Venus might be one of the most livable places in the solar system. At an altitude of 30 to 40 miles, The temperature hovers around 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pressure is similar to Earth's sea level. This habitable zone has inspired concepts for floating cities, massive airships filled with breathable air drifting high above Venus's hostile surface. Imagine it, humans living in cloud cities, using solar energy to power their habitats and extracting resources from the atmosphere. It sounds like science fiction, but it's not as far-fetched as it seems. Venus's proximity to Earth makes it a tempting target for colonization, and its gravity, similar to Earth's, would eliminate many of the health challenges posed by low-gravity environments like Mars. Some scientists even argue that Venus, not Mars, might be the better candidate for humanity's first off-world settlements. But there's a catch. To make floating cities a reality, we'd need materials that can withstand Venus's acidic atmosphere, and innovative technologies to support human life. And even if we could live in Venus's clouds, colonizing the surface would require terraforming on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Cooling the planet, reducing its atmospheric pressure, and neutralizing its carbon dioxide would take centuries, if not millennia. Could it be done? Maybe. But the question is whether it's worth the effort. Even if colonization is a distant dream, Venus still has plenty to offer. Its geological history holds clues about how rocky planets evolve, and studying its runaway greenhouse effect could help us better understand and perhaps mitigate climate change on Earth. Venus is also a reminder of how fragile planets can be. Once it might have been a lush, Earth-like world with oceans and a temperate climate. What happened? Did a series of volcanic eruptions trigger the greenhouse effect? Did something else tip the planet into its current state? Answering these questions could teach us not only about Venus, but about the fate of Earth and other planets like it. In the coming years, Venus will be back in the spotlight. NASA's Da Vinci Plus mission aims to study Venus's atmosphere in detail, searching for signs of past water and chemical clues about its history. The Veritas mission will map the planet's surface with high-resolution radar, revealing details about its geology and potential volcanic activity. Meanwhile, Europe's Envision mission will probe Venus's atmosphere and interior, looking for signs of tectonic processes and active volcanoes. And then there's the wildcard, private space exploration. Companies like Rocket Lab are planning their own missions to Venus, driven by the tantalizing possibility of finding life or unlocking new scientific discoveries. These missions could provide answers to questions the Soviets only began to ask, reigniting humanity's fascination with our enigmatic neighbour.